Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Brynelson with the California Department of Education, and we're very pleased in the statewide literacy office to have partnered with the Assessment Division to offer this webinar on accessibility resources from the classroom to assessments. And with that, we will begin. The state superintendent, Tony Thurmond's Reading by Third Grade and Beyond initiative aims to ensure literacy and biliteracy for all students in California. We are very serious and committed to moving the needle on student achievement in language, literacy, and mathematics. Preparing students to use the accessibility resources available for the CASP and ELPAC summative assessments allows students to demonstrate their learning fully and fairly. Today, I am pleased to be joined by my co-director, Bonnie Garcia. Dr. Garcia is here to say hello.
Hello.
Dr. Roberson couldn't join us. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hello, nice to be on. Thank you all for attending today and for being a part of this very important webinar. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome, and thank you, Bonnie. I want to also present our key speakers today, Judy Yang from the Assessment Division, Education Research and Evaluation Administrator, and Scott Fitzgerald, an Education Programs Consultant in the Assessment Division. And they will be doing the bulk of the work here, presenting this valuable information to you. It is possible that the state superintendent will be joining us, and if he does, we'll pause and turn it over to him. But in the meantime, we'll review our agenda. You are going to hear from Judy and Scott an overview of accessibility resources and more detail on the accessibility tools and how to use those resources. Also, the formative assessment resources that accompany both CASP and ELPAC. We'll have some time for Q&A and also provide you with information about other opportunities to learn about accessibility resources and literacy. Our objectives for today is for you to come away understanding the purpose of accessibility resources in assessment and become familiar with the CASP and ELPAC accessibility resources and tools, the formative assessment resources, including tools for teachers, the CASP and ELPAC interim assessments, and I will say the acronym, just spell it out once, the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, and ELPAC, English Language Proficiency Assessments in California. And finally, we hope that you will come away with knowing the opportunities for further professional learning. Now, we have created a handout for you that can also serve as a note taker. And we will put the link for that in the chat in just a moment and ask you to open that up. What you will need to do is to go to File. And in fact, it's in the chat right now. Thank you so much. And download that so that you have your own personal copy. Then you can see all of the links that Scott and Judy will be referring to as they speak today, and you can access those materials. In addition, at the top of the handout is a link to these presentation slides in PDF, so you will have access to that as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott Fitzgerald to lead us in our webinar and learning about accessibility resources. So Scott, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you for choosing to hang out with us today. As Nancy mentioned, my name is Scott Fitzgerald, and I am with the Math and ELA office in the Assessment Division here at CDE. Just as a quick housekeeping note before we start, the chat feature has been disabled. However, we do encourage you to utilize the Q&A feature, as we do have a team here from the Assessment Division working behind the scenes at the ready to answer any questions you have regarding assessments. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. First off, throughout this presentation, we will be discussing the various summative assessments included in the California assessment system. And that includes the Smarter Balanced for English Language Arts and Mathematics, the California Science Test, or CAST, the California Alternate Assessments, or CAAs, for ELA, Mathematics, and Science, and the California Spanish Assessment, or CSA. So these 4 assessments all fall under what we call the umbrella of CASP assessments. Additionally, California also provides the ELPAC, while not necessarily under the umbrella term of CASP. The ELPAC is also a vital part of California's assessment system. It has 4 assessments of its own: the initial ELPAC, the summative ELPAC, the initial alternate ELPAC, and the summative alternate ELPAC. So unless we note otherwise today, the information and suggestions we provide to you all apply to these assessments. So the CDE recognizes that the validity of CASP and ELPAC results depends on students being provided with the appropriate support or resources that are needed to help them overcome challenges that may prevent them from demonstrating their own skills and knowledge. Since the CASP summative window opened on January 20th, and the ELPAC summative window opened on February 2nd, it is important that any student who needs accessibility support is assigned the correct resources and is given time to practice using these resources now before they start taking their tests. So to help us understand the importance and the purpose of accessibility resources, as always, it's really important to understand and start with the why. California's students demonstrate a wide variety of skills, abilities, and interests. They come from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds, have different experiences, and live in various socioeconomic circumstances. Now, the population in your district might vary a little bit from the state makeup. However, I think we would all agree that schools in California serve a very diverse student population. And now, while the student diversity can enrich the learning experiences of all students, as you could imagine, it can also make teachers' work a little bit more complex. And so the information we're going to share with you today is intended to provide you with the tools and resources to ultimately help your students. Now, here's a graphic that you might have seen before. We use this image often when we're discussing accessibility resources because it does a great job in highlighting the differences between equality and equity. As you can see, the slide here shows 2 pictures. The first image represents equality. And as you can see in that top picture there, we have 4 bicyclists, all of whom have the same bike. They have what we would call equal equipment. The problem is that our cyclists each have their own different needs. Our first cyclist there is in a wheelchair. Looking over, you can see another person is very tall. And then that last person clearly could use a smaller bike. But when we look at the next picture below that, we see what represents equity. Instead of offering everyone the same bike, each cyclist is provided a bike that meets their needs. The cyclist in a wheelchair is provided a modified bike The tall cyclist has a larger bike, and the small cyclist now has a bike that is appropriately sized for their needs. So equity in this situation means that each cyclist has a bike they need to be successful. Ultimately, this image is highlighting that equality is not the same as equity. In the past, we often talked about equality in education, providing each student with the same educational opportunities. However, we are now much more focused on equitable education, providing each student with the tools and resources they need to be successful. And as most of you probably know, these needs can definitely vary greatly for each individual student. Now that we have a clear understanding of the why, let's do a little introduction to accessibility resources that are provided on California assessments, and then also look at some cool and useful tools to help you improve their usage in your schools and districts. So if you've attended another accessibility resources training in the past, the next few slides might just serve as a reminder. However, when it really comes to accessibility, there's one primary purpose, and it's really all about access. Access and fairness are issues for all students when it comes to learning. In fact, federal legislation both defines and supports the application of universal design principles, also known as UDL, to improve fairness on all state and school district-wide achievement tests. Students with specific learning needs may require accessibility resources both during instruction and on assessments so that they can properly demonstrate mastery of content. And remember, this part is super important. Access does not only apply to students with special needs. It's really about ensuring that all students, all with the capital ALL, have access to the tools and resources that they need. Some examples of equity challenges are test items that require extensive reading, even when the learning that is being measured has nothing to do with the reading, or requiring students with fine motor difficulties to handwrite their answers to essay questions when keyboarding could be used just as easily. CASP and ELPAC assessments were developed using UDL principles and with the recognition of the diverse characteristics and needs of California students. So a bunch of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations are available to ensure that students' accessibility needs are met. Moving along here. When it comes to how students can access accessibility resources, there are two options, embedded and non-embedded. Embedded resources are already available within the computer-based assessments, an example being text-to-speech in Spanish for math and science. Non-embedded resources are resources that are only available outside of the test delivery system and are provided by the school site or the LEA. An example of a non-embedded resource would be like a physical copy of a bilingual dictionary. Please keep in mind, some embedded resources are available only for specific test questions or specific domains for which they are allowed. Also, if a non-embedded resource is shown to be available for allowed items, it may be used only for the specific items for which the embedded version of the resource is available. Next up, resources available for the CASP and ELPAC test fall into three categories based on universal design for learning. The first category contains aids that support engagement. And these are resources that help students remain engaged with the test. So for example, providing breaks, a separate setting, or noise buffers. The second category is action and expression. These are resources that support students by allowing them to respond through various actions and expressions, such as through an adaptive keyboard or by using a scribe. And then lastly, the third category is presentation aids. And these are resources that support students by changing the way the assessment is presented. For example, when all or parts of an assessment are translated for an English learner, or when an assessment might be read aloud to struggling readers through text to speech. The California assessment system uses a multi-level approach to providing accessibility resources for students, and there are 4 types of resource tools. The first type of resources are called universal tools, and these are tools and resources that are available to all students and are based on their individual choice and preference. So you do not have to have anything to turn these on for students. They already come built into the test, and they include things like an English dictionary, line reader, a Spanish glossary, and spell check. And once again, these are available to all students. You don't need an IEP or a 504 to access these. The second type of accessibility resources are known as designated supports. And these are available to students where a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with the student's instructional needs. So for designated supports, students do not need to have an IEP or a 504 plan. Students just need to have an identified need for more support. But these can be for students such as an English learner or a struggling reader. And this really is great information to pass along to your educators because it is oftentimes overlooked. So some examples of designated supports include things like text-to-speech in Spanish or Spanish stacked dual language support. The third type of accessibility resources are known as accommodations. And to receive accommodations, a student must have an active IEP or 504 plan, and the accommodation must be written into the IEP or 504 plan and is currently being used as an instructional resource in the classroom. Accommodations are things like American Sign Language, Braille, or word prediction. Any student using a universal tool, a designated support, or an accommodation will get a valid test score because all of these resource types do not change what is being tested. So there's no penalty to the LEA for assigning any of these resources. Lastly here, we will address unlisted resources on the next slide. However, before we do that, I do know that was a lot of information that came at you really quick. It probably felt like you were getting hit with a little bit of a fire hose. So feel free to take a deep breath in this moment and remember, if at any time you're feeling overwhelmed or if it feels like information overload, please know that this slide deck will be shared. And once again, there should be additional information available to you in the resource guide, which hopefully there are links that are popping up in the chat as we speak. Okay, we can move on now. So now that you've had your deep breath, let's talk about unlisted resources. So let's say a student with an IEP or 504 receives a support in class that is not listed as a universal tool, designated support, or accommodation. We call these unlisted resources because these accessibility resources are not currently identified for use on the CASP or the ELPAC. Now, before you go and submit a request for an unlisted resource, we ask that you first check the California Assessment Accessibility Resource Matrix, which I will discuss some more on the next slide, to confirm that the resource is truly unlisted. So for example, breaks in communicative devices for amplification are things that are listed in the matrix, and you would not need to request these as an unlisted resource. So once you've confirmed that the resource is truly unlisted, the test site coordinator must submit a request to the CDE through the Test Operation Management System, also known as TOMS, a minimum of 10 business days before the student's first day of testing. We will review the requested support and approval will be granted by the CDE on the basis of the IEP or 504 plan's designation, and if this unlisted resource does not compromise the test's security. Lastly, Unlike the accessibility resources that are listed in the accessibility resource matrix, some unlisted resources or some unlisted resource requests may be determined to change the construct of what is being assessed. And subsequently, a student score may not be counted as participating for accountability. It may be invalidated for CASP or assigned the lowest obtainable scale score for ELPAC. And it's ultimately the CDE's determination of whether the requested resource will change the construct of what is being measured. A couple examples of an item that is known to change, or one example of an item that is known to change the construct of the test includes things like using a calculator for third grade math, or any pre-made graphic organizers for all grades. So I've mentioned it a couple times. I'm sure you're asking, what is the matrix? For CASP and ELPAC, the California Assessment Accessibility Resource Matrix is a document that lists all universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations for CASP and ELPAC. You will want to become familiar with this document. The matrix describes each possible resource that is available as a universal tool, designated support, or accommodation. And as was mentioned in the last slide, the resources identified in the matrix for each assessment will not change the construct of what is being assessed. And there is no penalty or negative impact for the LEA or the student for assigning a student of any of these resources. Please note that not all resources are available for all assessments. So for example, since the alternate assessments are administered on a one-to-one setting with a test examiner that is familiar with the student in their preferred communication modes, some accessibility resources are not available on those assessments. Additionally, new this year, sensory items were also added to the matrix as an accommodation. So a student can use a sensory item, for example, a fidget toy, a textured seat cushion, foot rocker, or other similar object to stay focused on their assessment. Once again, all the resources and documents that we're sharing with you today, they will be in the resource guide. And these documents are great resources, and we highly recommend you keep a copy handy of them, or a copy handy at all times. So just to give you an example, this is an image directly from the Accessibility Resources Matrix and gives you an idea of how things are displayed. So as you can see here, the English dictionary is a universal tool with the description that a student can use the English dictionary that is available for the full right portion of an ELA performance task, but not for the short paragraph responses that are usually on the CAT or a computer adaptive part of the assessment. It also states that this resource is not applicable to the CAA for ELA. The B there under delivery states that this tool can be embedded and non-embedded. The yes states that this resource is available for ELA. And the no states that this resource is not available for math, science, and Spanish assessments. It is also not available for the ELPAC CBA or the computer-based assessment, ELPAC P, which is the paper version, and ELPAC A, which is the alternate ELPAC. Another resource we have that supports the matrix are our accessibility graphics. And these are quick one-page reference guides for the available accessibility resources for each assessment. So for example, when you're looking at this document here, this section of the graphic lists all the embedded and non-embedded universal tools for ELA, such as breaks. And these documents are quite popular and a little bit easier to digest than referencing the full matrix. Remember, these resources exist to provide equitable access to students. Assigning resources on a global scale, either on principle or for simplicity's sake, is not the intention of accessibility resources. So for example, if all EL students at level 1 and 2 were assigned stacked translations for math, This will cause the test directions to also come up in Spanish, which would be confusing, as you could imagine, for students who are not proficient in reading Spanish. So the successful use of accessibility resources requires that the educational teams make decisions regarding supports on a student-by-student basis. Also super important to note, accessibility resources must be assigned in advance to give the students the opportunity to practice the resources during daily instruction, in classroom assessments prior to taking the CASP or ELPAC. Seeing these resources for the first time on a summative test could definitely lead to a little bit of confusion on their part. Okay, so far we've covered an introduction to accessibility resources and the different types of resources that are available. So let's take a moment to dive into a practical approach to assigning accessibility resources to students. This approach is not required, but it is an easy approach to matching your students with the appropriate resource to support their learning. The Individual Student Assessment Accessibility Profile, or what we call the ISAP tool, is an optional tool that can be used to identify accessibility resources for the CASP, ELPAC, and all the interim assessments. While we want to ensure that daily instruction includes a variety of strategies and resources for the widest needs of the diverse students in our classrooms, all students may not need these resources on statewide assessments. Some instructional supports may be inappropriate for testing because they interfere with the knowledge and skills that the test is intended to measure. The ISAP tool should be used in conjunction with the matrix, and the ISAP tool is an optional process, but can help ensure that all students are receiving the appropriate accessibility resources when taking California's assessments. The ISAP tool helps educators identify which accessibility resources can support a student's need. So for example, you're looking at a screenshot here of the ISAP tool. And the ISAP tool has a section for method of determination and a section for student needs. In the example here on the screen, this would be for a student that does not have an IEP or a 504 plan. So selecting the educator recommendation will only show designated supports. Then an educator can select the student need. In the student needs section here, they have chosen support for executive functioning, attention, cognition control, and processing. But there are other options to choose from as well. Once the method of determination in student needs section is completed, the ISAP tool will generate a list of designated supports and accommodations that might fit the student's need. So for example, you might choose color contrast, and it shows that it is an embedded resource. And if you want more information, you can hover your mouse over that little question mark there on the blue circle for more information about that specific support. You can select multiple accessibility resources in this section. Choosing accessibility resources in this ISAP tool does not impact student test settings in TOMS or the test delivery system. The ISAP tool is updated annually to reflect all updates to the CASP and ELPAC accessibility resources. And again, this is important to note, a student test settings can only be changed through TOMS, but the ISAP tool can help with finding and assigning the correct resources for the students. Moving along here. Using the ISAP tool may not be as convenient for all teachers and educators. So we have recently created a student needs matching tool, one for CASP and one for ELPAC as well. And these documents can help an educator quickly identify resources that can support a student's need. These are quite handy as they can be printed, and they're kind of like the, quick, handy resource guides. This section of the graphic focuses on supporting the executive functioning of a student, which includes attention, cognitive control, and process. Since universal tools are available to all students, this document will list all the available designated supports and accommodations that will support this need, such as color contrast. Another resource that is available is a guide for teachers to support students in the classroom called Accessibility Strategies for Teaching and Learning. This document, created by Smarter Balanced, will list the resource that is available on the CASP and ELPAC, a description of the resource, and how it may look like in direct and indirect teaching and learning. This example from the guide states that text-to-speech is an embedded designated support where the text is read aloud to the student via embedded text-to-speech technology. For direct teaching and learning, it gives examples of how to do this in a classroom by teaching listening skills, using read aloud material, and then checking for understanding. Reading problems aloud to students during instruction and modeling how to use text-to-speech applications, including controlling the speed and pitch, as well as raising or lowering the volume of the voice via volume control, can help students understand how this resource can support their learning. In addition, a student can independently practice this resource by having them listen to a pre-recorded audio interpretation, so things like an audiobook of a text or a book. Students can also work independently using text-to-speech applications. Lastly, just a couple of quick notes before I end with you today. To ensure accessibility resources truly support students, they need exposure and practice. Educators should be familiar with student needs early in the school year to provide them with the necessary resources to access classroom instruction and assessment. Testing should not be the first time or only time educators are thinking about and using these accessibility resources with students. Students should be familiar, comfortable, and confident while using resources related to their individual needs. And then students are most successful using accessibility resources on the summative assessment when they have had multiple opportunities to practice with those resources in a testing environment. Students can be provided with one-on-one targeted instruction on the use of accessibility resources using the training tests, and teachers can also make the accessibility resources available on the practice tests and assign them to students for the interim assessments as well. And that brings me to the end of my overview about accessibility today. I'm now going to hand it over to Judy, who will share with you information on the formative assessment resources and tools for teachers.
And before we move on to Judy, we're going to take a moment to welcome our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman, who has a few words he'd like to share. So welcome, Superintendent.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. And we'll get you back to Judy. And thank you, Judy. Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for being here. Just hearing about the subject of test taking still makes me anxious as a former student who struggled with tests. Take it from me. I think our students are more than a test, but anything that we can do to help our students be able to meet the demands of test taking is important. So thank you for sharing the resources here today. And I hope you all are getting everything that you need. If there are specific things you want us to know, drop them in the chat so that we can make sure to address it. So many times I've talked with students, they either worried about the test, or we hear about students who just don't want to deal with the test, so they're bubbling things in, or, like kids I know and kids who feel so anxious that they can even barely take the test. So I'm grateful for all of you who want to be in this conversation, and let's learn together. Let's learn about these resources that we can use for providing access to students who may need more accessibility. And so I just wanted to greet you all. Thank you for being here on this journey. And look forward to anything that you drop in the chat or in our surveys to let us know how we can hone the messages to best meet your needs. If you want to throw out suggestions that are working for you in your school communities, we also are happy to have that. Thanks for being here. Hope some of you will come back and join us on this Friday. We're continuing our oral history discussion series on Black history. On this Friday, we are honored to have two great civic leaders, the California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, who has been a civil rights leader, an educator, and now leading protecting elections, and the Honorable Mayor Willie Brown, who was the first African-American person to be elected both speaker and mayor of the city of San Francisco. A lot of programming. I hope you'll come back for that and for our Move the Needle discussion, where we talk about how we help students improve test scores in reading and math. So again, thanks for being here today, to all the presenters and to all of the attendees. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. We appreciate that. And with that, we'll turn this over to Judy to talk about formative assessment. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Superintendent Thurman and Scott. Now that we have a short overview of the accessibility resources of California assessment systems, we're now going to focus on some ways you as teachers and educators can support your students in the classroom with accessibility. And also remember that if you have any questions while we are presenting, please put it in the Q&A section. We have members from the ELA and Math Office, the Science Office, the ELPAC Office, and the Interim Assessment Office answering questions in the background. So please feel free to ask any questions you're going to cast for ELPAC. So a primary purpose for CAS and ELPAC is to improve everyday classroom teaching and learning. We want all of our students to have equal opportunities to access content material and to accurately demonstrate what they know and are able to do. By using the principles UDL, CAS, and ELPAC, including the alternate assessments, have included resources that can address visual, auditory, and physical access barriers, allowing virtually all students to demonstrate what they know and can do. Now, there's a wide range of instructional strategies, resources, and tools that can be used in daily instruction and on classroom assessments to help students access the intended and tested curriculum. In the next part of this webinar, we'll focus on the flexible resources that can support you as teachers and other educators. Now, these resources can be flexible in the way they present content, the way students demonstrate learning, and even the student engagement activities for daily instruction are designed to be flexible. First, let's start with the Tools for Teachers website. This resource is available to all K-12 California educators and provides standard aligned instructional resources or lesson plans that are embedded in the formative assessment process. The lessons are aligned with California's content standards for English language arts and math and science. Every lesson plan is designed with UDL in mind and has embedded formative assessment strategies and assessment strategies and accessibility strategies that can help teachers and educators tailor instruction to support student learning. In addition, the Tools for Teacher website include professional learning resources for a variety of topics, including ELPAC resources that are aligned with the standards for English language development. In Tools for Teachers, there are two separate web pages devoted to accessibility strategies and formative assessment strategies. To help identify these strategies with individual lessons, you will see a silhouette of a person icon for each assessment strategy and the formative assessment clover icon for each formative assessment strategy. Now, to find different strategies in Tools for Teachers, you can select the Professional Learning button on the left side of the homepage, and from there you can select either the Formative Strategy resources or the Accessibility Strategy resource to view a full list of both types of strategies. There are currently 44 formative assessment strategies and 60 accessibility strategies, each providing a full description of the strategy and step-by-step directions on how to use it. Many even include printable attachments and handouts for you to download and use right away. And again, these are all free for K-12 California educators. Accessibility strategies embedded in lessons are useful in eliciting evidence of student learning, so instruction accessibility supports can be adjusted in the moment and help teachers provide just-in-time support. The formative assessment strategies include shorter exit tickets or 5 activities, or longer activities like the Socratic seminars, which all have the common goal of checking where the students are in their learning. And just like the formative assessment strategies, there are a large variety of accessibility strategies to choose from in Tools for Teachers. Some include the Read Aloud, the Bilingual Dictionary, Global Notes, Highlighter, Closed Captioning, and Breaks. The purpose of these accessibility strategies are to help with ideas of how to help students access and engage in the content no matter what background experiences or knowledge they may have. Now, some educators find it helpful to implement the assessment strategies into everyday instruction to help determine which resources might be helpful to specific students, as many of these assessment strategies are similar to the embedded accessibility resources on CAS and ELPAC assessments. Again, it's important to note that accessibility tools for all students, Again, it's important to note that these accessibility tools for all students, and they are not necessarily limited to students with IEP or 504. For example, universal tools and dentist supports are available to all students. Now, students who practice these strategies during everyday instruction can transfer the skill to many different settings, including the CAS and ELPAC tests. There's a lot of flexibility in the ways these strategies are used. Educators can use them as described on the website, or they can modify them to fit their unique needs. Next, I want to share another resource that can help with accessibility. The CAS and ELPAC interim assessments are also part of the California Comprehensive Assessment System. The CAS includes the Smart Balanced interim assessments for ELA and math, and the CAST, and ELPAC, which includes the interim assessments for students whose first language is anything other than English. The CAS and ELPAC assessments are available year-round for educators to explore and use. They are optional assessments that are provided for free from the state to all California LEAs. The CAS and ELPAC interim assessments are not part of the state or federal accountability system, and results are not reported to CDE. A link to the CAS and ELPAC interim assessment webpage are available in your resource guide. The CAS and ELPAC interim assessments are designed to be used flexibly with students in the classroom and to support teaching and learning. They're purposeful, designed to support teaching and learning in two ways: as assessments of learning in a standardized manner and assessments for learning in a non-standardized manner. In addition, the CAS and ELPAC interim assessments can be used by school staff for professional learning purposes. Now, LA staff are encouraged to use the interim assessments in different ways to support their needs, but it's important to remember that assessments and scoring materials are also considered secured materials. Any use, display, or distribution of the interim assessments or scoring materials that results in access to individuals beyond the LEA staff and students are considered a compromise of assessment security. The interim assessments are meant to be student-facing and teacher-facing only. The scoring materials and resources are available in the Test Operation Management System, or TOMS, and are available only to educators in California. That means that interim assessments and scoring materials should not be shared with parents, guardians, reproduced in any form, or used outside the classroom, or posted online or in any other public place. We often get a question from educators on whether or not teachers can assign the interim assessments as homework, and the answer is no. Doing so will violate test security. When the interim assessments are administered on a computer, either through a standardized or non-standardized administration, students can practice using the accessibility resources. Again, accessibility resources provide equal opportunity for all students to demonstrate learning on the interim assessments and on the summative assessments. However, they should be used on assessments only if the student is familiar with the accessibility resource, or if something is similar is used during instruction and the student has multiple opportunities to practice. As an educator, we know that if some students are given the opportunity to practice, they're going to play with the resource during the assessment. Accessibility resources are available on all interim assessments: Smarter Balance, the CAS, and ELPAC. They are the same accessibility resources included in the summative assessments. Now, designated supports and accommodations can be assigned for the interim and summative assessments on the basis of the students' assigned settings in TOMS. However, for interim assessments, test administrators and test examiners can temporarily assign accessibility resources to students in the test administrator interface. But please note that universal tools are automatically turned on for all students on the basis of students' preference and selection, unless it's disabled by the test administrator using the turn off universal tools designated support option. This is usually done when a universal tool is distracting a student. Now, if accessibility resources are changed in the test administrator interface, so while you're taking the administering the interim assessments, they will not be saved into the system for the summative assessments. This is the goal way to determine if a resource is useful for a particular student and gives the student an opportunity to practice the resource on CASP or ELPAC assessments. If an educator determines a student should have the use of an accessibility resource for summative assessments, the educator or teacher needs to take the appropriate steps to change the test settings in TOMS for the summative assessments, such as contacting the site testing coordinator. Again, this option to temporarily assign a resource cannot be done during the summative assessments, and test settings for the summative assessments must be assigned at least 4 hours before the students start taking the summative assessments. Using the accessibility resource on interim assessment is another way for students to gain familiarity with tools and resources prior to taking the summative assessments. But it's important to remember that practicing on the interim assessment is not the only time a student should have practice to and access with these tools or resources. A student can have a test administrator or test examiner disable any universal tool that might be distracting or that the student does not need or use or unable to use before the test is approved in the test administrator interface. Lastly, I want to share some CDE-sponsored training on accessibility resources that are available to you and your colleagues. These are a good start to help teachers, support staff, and other educators understand the importance of accessibility resources. The accessibility on-demand training modules are available as 2 modules, Module A and Module B. It is recommended that Module A, matching accessibility resources to student needs, be completed prior to Module B using accessibility resources and daily instruction, since Module A provides an overview, then Module B is a deeper dive into accessibility resources. These modules are on demand and can be completed at any time. These training modules provide guidance on how to use accessibility resources, how to observe students using accessibility resources, and how to adjust throughout the year on the basis of these observations. In addition, we have a formative assessment shared practices webinar. There are 3 webinars. The first one was on January 29th, but the 2 more will be held in February. One will take place tomorrow, February 12th, and another one will be on February 26th. Each webinar will focus on a different topic, including formative assessment and accessibility strategies, instructional resources for science, and professional learning resources that support the English language development. During the webinars, members of CDE, California classroom teachers, and administrators from around the state will share how they are promoting and using formative assessment to support teaching and learning in the classroom. The webinars are scheduled for after school from 3:30 to 5 p.m., and we hope that this time makes it easier for you to attend. Again, all these links that I'm sharing and providing will be in the resource guide. Now we have some time to answer some questions you may have. We are very interested in how we may support you and welcome your questions. So
Judy, we have a few unanswered questions
yeah,
in the Q&A, so there may be some open questions that you'd like to address.
I have one that says, can blocks be used for the math portion of CASP? I have a 3rd grader who asked this. So blocks and math manipulatives can be considered as an unlisted resource. So going to what Scott has mentioned, if your student is using this daily in the classroom, is written their IEP, go ahead and put in an unlisted resource in TOMS, and the CD will review it and approve it based on what you put in. We have another person that asks, how do I get paper-based tests for a student with an IEP who has this as a accommodation? If a student is, if it's written in the IEP that they need to have a paper-based test, go ahead and go into our website. We do have a cas-lpac.org, and there will be a section where you can go and ask for a paper test. See what else. I saw that there was a question asking about cell phones, using it in the classroom for health monitoring, and cell phones and smart cell phones are allowed as a medical support. It's a designated support, which means as long as the student needs it and the educator knows that they need the medical support of a cell phone for glucose monitoring, for example, then we just say that we allow it, but just let the LA know that the testing administrator should be monitoring the student while the student has access to a cell phone. I see a lot of my team answering questions in the pack.
We do have a question about the use of picture cards for the ELPAC.
Okay. I do have
Someone is now answering that. Yes.
Yeah, I have Jessica Jennings. Do you want to come on camera or you just want to type in the answer?
Yeah, I'll just type in the answer real quick, but just generally, picture cards are typically only used for our alternate assessments, and so we do not have those for the general ELPAC. If that is a communication mode used by the student, that could be a unlisted resource that you could request. And then we do have things like yes or no pre-printed cards that could be used, but most of the test items are internal within the test, so the student would be able to point or draw or do other things if they typically do. But if you still need more help, I would definitely suggest emailing elpac.org so that we could give you more detailed instructions and maybe work directly with you guys to come up with a solution.
Thank you. I also saw a question in there about domain exemptions, and it wasn't in our resource guide, so I'm going to put it in the chat. If you have any, if you want to learn about domain exceptions for the ELPAC, it's going to be in the chat.
Yeah, and we have a domain exemption decision-making tool that you can use with your IEP teams where you guys can kind of discuss the type of evidence and for each domain what would be appropriate, whether or not it would be appropriate. We do want to stress that these are used in very rare situations because we do have such a comprehensive matrix that we are able to provide as many avenues for communication and demonstrating what students know and can do on our assessments. But again, if you need any help with documenting that in an IEP or anything like that, please email us directly and we'll give you some guidance.
Thank you, Jessica. I also saw a comment about designated supports, specifically the pause and replay for ELPAC. And pause and replay for ELPAC is a perfect example of using a strategy if it's something that they're using in class all the time. So, you're pausing, you're repeating things that you're saying. You are, for your student, then that would qualify for pause and replay. We have assigning pause and replay for the whole school or for all your students that are taking the ELPAC would not be something that we would recommend at the CDE because, we want to make sure that we are not reclassifying students until they were ready to be reclassified. And then let's see what else we have.
Real quick, Judy, just to jump in real fast.
Yes.
For if any of you are like me, you'll probably think of 100 questions after you leave today. I did drop in the chat. So if you have additional questions that come up, feel free to email our CASP inbox at casp@cde.ca.gov or elpac@cde.ca.gov. Once again, it's in the chat if you need it.
The links to the resource guide or webinar resources handout are in the chat, so look there. And also, Judy put the link for the domain exemptions in the chat, so you want to look there as well. Well, Judy and Scott, do you think we finished our questions?
I think so too. I have one more. I know someone mentioned a quick reference guide, and so I'm gonna put in the chat all our quick reference guides that we have, including how to set up a domain exemption. So it will all be in the chat.
So that's the last link that you just put in.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Back to you, Nancy. And here's where to get answered. Again, if you have any questions, definitely go to our CAS website, or you can email us at cde.ca.gov or elpac@cde.ca.gov. I'm gonna be very honest with you guys. People like me and Scott and our team, we monitor this inbox daily. So we are tasked to respond at least within 24 to 48 hours. So feel free to send in a email question and we'll definitely be there to respond to you. Thank you, Nancy.
You're so welcome. Thank you. A big thank you to you, Judy and Scott, for all this valuable information. And what I would say is that if a lot of this flew by you and you need to spend a little more time with it, which is true for me, please use that resource guide, that handout that we provided, the Google link for. You can download it for yourself or, save it in view only. And I would be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for our future literacy webinars. So those of you who are involved in teaching literacy, we have 3 more coming up. I know we've had a quite the slate of events. And we're talking about possibly doing part 2 on high impact tutoring assisted either online or with AI. So look out for that. But right now we have one coming up in March on providing best first instruction and intervention in integrated reading and writing. And then in May, we will be unveiling for the first time, fingers crossed, the literacy content blocks for English medium classrooms in grades 6 through 12, and also guidance for teaching literacy in multilingual settings, either dual language, bilingual classrooms, etc. So on our California Literacy webpage, which is linked there, you will see registration links for all of those webinars. And also, you will find them on the handout that we've been giving you links to. And like the assessment division, and I just am amazed at the wealth of resources and information being provided and available. You may also contact me or my co-director, Dr. Bonnie Garcia. These are our direct email addresses, but also you can use statewide literacy campaign, all 3 words squished together, at cde.ca.gov, and we monitor that mailbox as well. We thank you so much for being here today, and we will be posting the recording of this on our resources tab in that very website that I shared with you, but it takes us a few weeks to get that organized. And with that, we will bid you adieu and give you back 3 whole minutes. Thank you so much.